Hey, good morning, guys. Hope everyone's having a great day. Hope everyone had a great weekend. We are coming pretty close to 12/18, right? That's the big day for MU. But like I said, right, there's still stuff that is setting up. There's a lot of charts that do look good, hence why I'm still doing the weekly scans. And I wanted to kick this one off with potential downside. You guys saw me take like a couple lottos on this one last week. Two of them did go in profit a little bit. One I think went like 3%. The other one went like 10 or 14, kind of going into the close. And then we ended up opening higher. That was this day here, right? We kind of went short right around 607.91, and then obviously it pulled down and closed right around 606.62. And then we opened up here, kind of broke out above that spot. Ended up just being a wick, but I did close it. I had plenty of time on the 1220 contracts. We were still targeting 604. But this chart still looks really good in my opinion. Right, I mean, we're not really seeing a break over 607.91. Typically, if you guys don't know already, Wednesday is typically the high or the low of the week. If it can claim Wednesday's high, we'll usually see continuation Thursday, Friday. We didn't get that, right? I mean, really on Wednesday, which was 12.4, we really stalled out in terms of spread and volume on 12.5, and then even more so on Friday, right, with that wick kind of extending over the top. That was a majority of our volume was actually the rejection and it selling back down under 607.91. So pretty interesting. I talked about this in the general chat, guys, where I said if we can just open up underneath 607.91 one more time, I think it might be worth a short just risking 609.07, which is that high from Friday. Or, right, if we get some kind of gap up and then fade underneath 607.91, so it would kind of look like something like this, where it breaks under, get some kind of retest of that old kind of weekly resistance, then we could look for a continuation down, right? Only reason I'm really looking at this is we're seeing, like I said, stalling out in terms of volume, candle spread here near the highs, which could be signs of exhaustion. I mean, we pretty much just rallied with like three days of red, right, since 11/18, right? This has been a pretty incredible run. So there could be some exhaustion, some lack of inventory or willing buyers up here where a lot of people are now only willing to buy dips. So we could see that exhaustion kind of happen. It start to pull back a little bit. And it wouldn't really be necessarily bearish, right? This would just be a pullback into a 603.91 daily gap, potentially continuation from there if I'm being honest. But it could be a nice little stat pad to have like 5 to 10 contracts and then roll those into the swings, right? Plenty of data is coming out this week. If you guys didn't know, we have CPI and then PMI. So two good things in order to potentially be a catalyst. We obviously have some earnings as well. I don't know if that would catalyze it necessarily as much as CPI or PMI, but it is a good week here for just a slight pullback in my opinion. Also, I want to talk about dark pools. I have to switch this over really quickly, so bear with me. But you guys should know that 603.91 or 604 was a big level. I made everybody mark it on their charts that was watching in general chat. Had about 42 signature prints. And then let me see if I could switch this over really quickly. Window capture. This one. There we go. You guys will be able to, you can't see everything, but you guys can see 19 prints at 508.50, right? So they're basically bidding down each previous close. This one is a little bit different, right? 606. Oh, 606. I don't know why I said 608. Yeah, so they're basically bidding each previous close, right? And that's how they can get enough fuel, right? Once the selling occurs at the top, really kind of exhaust out near the highs. MMs or market makers, whatever you guys want to say, however that ends up being facilitated down, right? Those guys help facilitate price and kind of auction it and push it back down towards those prints, right? So good levels at 60, 606.50, and then on top of that we also have that 603.91, right? So pretty big orders there. I would say the 604 is still the largest one, but just something to kind of keep an eye on, and that's why I wanted to start it out with the short side here. I do think that this is a good potential play. Like I said, just a roll, and you know, get something to kind of roll into those longer dated calls. Now let's jump into a few other ones, guys. All the rest are going to be pretty much long side focused, so just wanted to start out with a short term. If you guys see me taking SPY puts or talking about SPY puts, it's probably because we're either breaking under 607.91 off of like a failed gap up, or we open under 607.91 and we're continuing to stall there. Don't be surprised if I take 604 puts for 1220. Okay, guys, big week coming up for crypto, and this is probably the name I'm going to be looking at. CLSK, you guys should kind of already have this in the back of your mind as to why I like it. Clear pivot here. This was that consolidated range. Remember where a lot of people thought this was accumulation. I think they were right. I think this was accumulation, and it swept under on low volume. I think it reaccumulated, and then it popped out, and then we're seeing more signs of accumulation here with higher volume now that this whole old low has been reclaimed, right? If I go to the weekly, this is very apparent, right? Very, very apparent in my opinion, right? This is that spot, right? That consolidated range. It's sold under on low volume, which is very, very telling. The sign or the tell wasn't that it wanted to sell, just a reaccumulation on low volume by them bidding. And now we got back above, right? And take a look at the volume as we reclaim this spot in the lower wicks and tie it in with the volume. This thing looks like it's getting ready to go, right? And it's a pretty simple target. I'd be looking for this to go to 18 or potentially the top of this range here, which is like somewhere in like the 19s/20s. But why am I super interested in Bitcoin, or yeah, kind of like crypto related names? We have a huge catalyst coming up. I believe it's on the 10th, so Tuesday, right? Microsoft, if you guys don't know, and its shareholders are going to be voting on whether the company wants to add Bitcoin as part of its treasury reserves, right? So if that vote gets passed, guys, they are going to go out and go buy a ton of Bitcoin and add that to their balance sheet or their reserves. And really, this is so smart, right? This is a great way to combat inflation, right? So the company's actually going to be solidifying their balance sheet and be essentially inflation proof, right? And if you kind of think as to where we're going within like the first year or two of Trump's administration, tariffs are by nature inflationary, right? So it just makes a ton of sense to have that as kind of like a hedge towards your company, right, against the US dollar, to go out and get something that's essentially inflation proof, right, or will at least mitigate against inflation, and add that to your balance sheet, right? This is kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. There's a limited amount of supply of Bitcoin, so if Microsoft has a ton of cash, guys. If you guys don't know, they have a ton of money. If they go out and they start buying a shitload of Bitcoin, Bitcoin's pricing is going to go through the roof. And I think this is a good opportunity for a lot of these names. And that's why I'm kind of looking at names that are set up and primed in terms of like structure. And it's been pretty hard, right? I mean, coin has been super hard to catch, man. I'm not going to lie. Like the premium pricing has just been so expensive because the implied moves are insane. I was going to take this off 296, but now that it's at these highs, it just seems like I'm chasing this, right? And I don't want to chase this name. It's so close to this little 368 level, and it could go to all-time highs. I don't know. I might take like a lotto on this one. But this name looks super, super extended. So coin's kind of off the table. Mara, doesn't look the worst, but this is a little bit messy. What else? MSTR, always expensive beginning of the week. I like to trade this on like Thursday or Friday. So like this is kind of out of there. So I'm not too big of a fan of MSTR right now. And then Riot as well. Probably the next best option. Just a little bit messy, right? I mean, it kind of has this progression gap low that's being held. So it could bounce and go to the highs, but right now, CLSK just makes the most sense, right? I've talked about this so much, guys. So much, and I just think it's set up, right? I think it's set up with it reclaiming this old weekly zone. The weekly charts look fantastic, and then we have that major catalyst coming up on Tuesday. So I'm very, very, very excited for this one. I'm going to go ahead and probably add, I would probably go January 18 calls on this one just to give myself some time in case I'm wrong. December 20th could work, but I think the January 18 call on this one is good, right? And it kind of comes down to Tuesday, so we'll know very quickly. But I don't see a reason why Microsoft wouldn't add this as just a hedge to their portfolio, right, or to their balance sheet. It just makes so much sense, especially considering the potential inflationary acts that could be, brought by the Trump administration with tariffs, so just everything that's kind of going on. I could see the first year kind of moving inflation up, right? And it just make a lot of sense just to have this as a hedge. I see no downside to buying this. So big day for crypto on Tuesday with Microsoft. So definitely have crypto on watch prior to that. If you guys could remind me as well if I don't take CLSK, I would really appreciate it. But yeah, have to keep your eyes on this. Okay, this shouldn't be anything new here, guys. This is MU. More of an update, if anything. But it really just kind of comes down to earnings, right? Which is totally fine. We've been building this position for a while. The chart still looks really good. I'll zoom out really quickly on the weekly after I just break this down. But You guys should know, right, that it did sell down all the way to this gap at 95.77. Our ads were pretty much taken in this general range, right? And we were looking for it to not only pop, but pop back above this spot here, right? Remember, this sold off midway through the gap and then really created this zone, right, where we had 114.8 being our high, our resistance high, right, or the top of the range, if you will. And then the bottom of the range was clearly a spot here, right, where we bounced here, we bounced here, we bounced here, right? And you guys can clearly see this is like a box. We have the top, we have the bottom. And then we ended up selling underneath it or undercutting it just a little bit to accumulate, in my opinion, right off of this gap fill. And then we popped above, pulled back to that spot, popped back above, right? Very, very simple now. And the way I'm kind of treating this is I'm trying to mitigate my risk as much as possible. Obviously, my ads were in this lower range here, but I think it's smart to now just risk the bottom of this zone that was reclaimed, right? This is the bottom of that range. And if it breaks underneath this spot at 98.94, the loss should only be about 5 to 7%, which is very, very realistic. That's a very good loss, right? And then the upside reward is massive, right? We've talked about 127, 122, but right, you have to think that this is leading into earnings, right? So we have to kind of just be a little bit tolerant with it just chopping around like this, and I assume it will do that probably up until the end of this week. But the thing that I love about this chart, and I'll show you guys a few other little bits and pieces of it, but really on the weekly, guys, we've been trading for inside this 923 weekly bar for 10 weeks now. So 10 inside weeks is insane. The compression on this chart is absolutely wild, where if we do get a big move, right, the contracts are going to go absolutely wild because they haven't been pricing in, right, the volatility because it hasn't been moving, right? Obviously, it is coming into an earnings on 12/16, I believe it is. This is the weekly chart. I think it's 12/18. But so IV will naturally increase as we get closer to that. But really, all these contracts have been completely compressed. So if we get some kind of move, which usually after compression like this, we do get a big move, I'm expecting this thing to go crazy. Now, ideally, right, pathway of this, I don't think it's necessarily going to go straight to 127 off of earnings. That would be nice. These contracts would pay huge if it did that. I think the more realistic pathway is a breakout and either hits 114.80, right, and creates that high type flag and then breaks out from here, or, right, we just get a gap above 114.80, it pulls back with a gap and go, right, and then it starts to continue up into 127. So that's really what I'm thinking happens. I don't think, unfortunately, this is just going to be a gap up straight to 123 to 127. More than likely, right, just a move from the bottom of the range from earnings all the way to the top of the range, and ideally it rejects 114 and has a high type flag on divergent volume, or it breaks above 114.80, pulls back and holds, right? So very, very interesting setup here. It's still bullish in my opinion. We obviously have the lows here. We've been setting up a pretty key pivot on the weekly for a higher low to continue higher. Now, I want to show one other thing. I'm looking at my notes really quickly. SMH, right, this is kind of primed, right? We've talked about this with the symmetrical triangle that's been forming out. Very, very crucial, right? I mean, we've had pretty much this higher low trend line holding forever. We're about to snap through the lower high trend line or our uptrend line, right, where we could really get a breakout there. But I think this really looks good on the daily. Nobody's really talking about this, where we ended up having this, once again, the kind of consolidation, this weekly trap underneath 240 that really sprung us off of this this trend line here, right? So you got to think, this was a big key pivot here, right around 1031. This is the 31st sell-off, obviously. We were fighting for support here. We ended up breaking down. Everybody was freaking out. This actually ended up being a bounce off the 200 MA as well as this lower trend line. But this ended up being a weekly close back above 240, which is really important because it kind of looks like a liquidity sweep. But the big thing is now we ended up trending back above. And look where we got above, guys. I always talk about these progression gaps are very big, right? We ended up kind of rejecting it initially here, right, with a big, big bar. A lot of volume obviously baked into not only the high, but also obviously the low as well. And that's kind of what sent us lower once we couldn't get above that. Now, the fact that we pushed through this and are now pulling back on divergent volume, right, and take a look at the candle spread here on these this last bar here from Friday. Pretty crazy, right? Where I do think that we have a ton of potential for this thing to really go, especially if this is held at the open on Monday. You got to think we have a couple other big charts that are holding, right? That are some of the biggest holdings in SMH, right? Take a look at Nvidia. Nvidia is kind of the same thing, where we ended up kind of finding a bottom here on 1127, a slow grind and a very, very big breakout through this kind of like volume gap that you'll see. I'll show you guys in a second, but take a look at the high volume here that really defended this zone, and then it closed strong, and now we're pulling back onto this zone as support. Take a look. It's all kind of the same thing, right? We had a progression gap back here, right, from 11.5 to 11.6. This has been a key spot as support. Obviously, it broke down and kind of retested it here and then managed to get back above. But not only that, right, not only the progression gap, take a look. This is an old high back here from like June, where we've really, kind of either struggled to get through initially or then reclaimed it as support and then try to get through again. This is what created that gap above, right? So a big, big spot right around 139.8 to like 142 that broke through and is now pulling back as potential support. And I think that this can actually kind of get a move all the way up to those all-time highs. So really interesting setup there. If we take a look as well, I mean, like, guys, I talk about this all the time. You gotta have to look at like monthlies too. I actually want to go back really quickly and reflect on SMH. Like SMH doesn't give you too much, right? It's more so the weekly. But take a look at some of these volume, like take a look at the volume off of this this trend line here, or this higher low, right? Some of the most, I wouldn't say the most insane volume. We'll see it more on SOXL, but some of the most insane lower wicks I've seen in a long time, right? Where clearly buyers are trying to soak this, and then we're seeing super tight compression here. We take a look at SOXL. Right, kind of the same thing where we're essentially pulling back down into like our 618. So I'll pull this up really quickly. Right, just shy of our 618, just a little bit lower. So this would actually be like the 786, but still kind of like a discounted zone. Take a look though, we're pulling right back onto this old lower high. We've based it as support, and this is what I was talking about. Take a look at the volume here from August. Super, super high volume. Pretty much the same volume that we saw here at the lows, which is wild, right? Long lower wick, which indicates that buying pressure pushing this up, formed a hammer. Same thing, very high volume off the low. And then we've kind of gone down in terms of volume, and then the candle spread is decompressing as well, or compressing, I'm sorry. So this chart, once again, too, looks very, very good. If you guys don't know, this is the Leverage Bull ETF. So this thing is doing the same exact thing where it kind of broke through the progression gap high and is now holding, right? Plenty of upside gaps for this to potentially trade into. I mean, we have like 34.97 here. We have 50. Obviously, that would take a little bit more time, but just wanted to show you guys the ETFs themselves kind of on the monthly, and we're kind of go backwards a little bit. And then take a look at Avgo. Avgo, one of the next biggest holdings, obviously Nvidia is the biggest, but this is looking insane as well, right? This is, in my opinion, front-running the earnings report that's going to be coming this week. If we just kind of load up our EMAs really quickly, it really just kind of broke out through this progression gap, and it's the same thing, guys. This is why I'm having you guys mark these, right? Take a look at that. Once it kind of reclaimed this progression gap here, it kind of based in it. Candle spread got super tight. EMA started to curl. It kind of held the EMAs as well as the progression gap. And then you had a big, big markup, guys. I mean, this was a massive mover. This was a massive, massive mover. And now I really think that this has potential to trade all the way up to 184 to 186. Right? I mean, this is kind of, in my opinion, the analog to look at for the remainder of the semis, right, that are still going to be reporting here shortly. SMH looks prime, Nvidia looks good, right? So overall, in my opinion, semis look fantastic. So we have to see, obviously, how they report. I want to see how that Nvidia chart kind of forms out. Obviously, I'm going to keep my eyes on SMH, but that tied into MU, right? MU kind of looks like the next one, right? It looks like a very, very big potential chart to explode. Let's remove these really quick, remove all studies. But yeah, and also, you guys, like, there's a lot of stuff you have to think about in terms of like fundamentals. I've mentioned it a lot with them. I don't know if everybody kind of understands fundamentals with charts, but like, guys, they're so undervalued. Like your 1 year revenue growth is like 53% above all their peers. 2 year revenue growth is like 20%. So, they've got a lot of revenue growth over the last year, specifically because of this AI boom. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize, and if you guys don't know, MU is mainly storage, right? So a lot of these things are going to require mass amounts of storage, right? It's not going to just be this AI boom and everybody's, all over the name without really thinking about the back end stuff like cooling, like storage, right? These things are huge. From its PE, guys, it's trading well below some of its peers as well. So an undervalued stock. Dude, like there's just so much. Like its EPS growth, I think, is like 600%. I don't know if you guys can quote me on that. It might be a little bit lower. It might be like 570. But just insane amount of growth, undervalued for its, kind of its thing. And if you guys don't know, like it's also a very cyclical stock too, right? Like it kind of runs around the same times. And obviously when like the economy or the geopolitical stuff kind of dies down a little bit, these stocks have the opportunity to run. So MU is a big one. TSM, semis in general are just very cyclical stocks. And when you have an opportunity like this with a lot of QE, right, and obviously some of these Chinese narratives are starting to die down with eases of kind of like restrictions for us selling to them, or us purchasing from Chinese or Taiwan-based semis, we're going to see another potential rally, right? And this chart, I don't know how else to explain. This chart looks super good, guys. So that's a big one there. Just wanted to touch on that really quickly. Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it with that one. So we can jump into the next one. Let's go ahead and take a look at some growth names, specifically ARKK, because those are not done just yet. All right, what's going on, guys? Roblox now, pretty easy one. We actually had a position on this one. If you guys didn't take it, that's okay. I still think there's a chance here. But one of the most beautiful charts I've seen, right? We talked about this where it had that divergent pullback back into this zone up here, which is technically our weekly LPS. Nice hold to 47.67. And then it ended up ripping the following week as soon as we opened. We ended up pressing all the way up to 53.88, which is this resistance, whether it was this weekly high here or this weekly spot here, whatever you guys wanted to mark it as, totally fine. And if you guys actually remember, we took the position here, right? Not my typical entry. I had 10 contracts, so I was a little bit, I would say, overexposed for a chart that I'm not super comfortable with. But remember, I took it here. It was like a 15-minute pullback, kind of like back towards the open. Remember, it kind of like wicked a little bit lower. I wish I had taken that. But once it reclaimed 53.88, I got in. We closed this kind of like a strong hammer here. And I usually wouldn't take this, right? Usually my kind of bread and butter would be a harmonic breakout, so high volume for the breakout. And then once I would like to see is a pullback on lower volume to retest that old resistance and then validate it as support, and then I would look to get in and ideally you get continuation. This didn't do that, right? This ended up closing as a hammer, which could have been like a hanging man at the top. Obviously, it wasn't high volume, but 10 contracts was a little bit more than I would have liked. But the following day, we had a crazy move, right? Where it basically pulled back, retested the highs, and then just rallied, right? Just a massive move that day. And as we pushed up into this gap at 59, this is where I started to trim. I took off my full position here just because my next step here is and usually this happens a lot. We saw it on Roku, we saw it on Shop, is once we hit these gaps, we see either a high tight flag where it pulls back and kind of catches back up to the EMAs and then continues higher, or we get a break through the gap, right? Some kind of pullback or some kind of consolidation in this zone, and then it continues for its next leg higher. But typically though, we see that stopping power right around that gap where sellers are trying to prevent price. We have people like me and other, shorter dated day traders or swing traders taking profits into this zone and then looking to re-add on a pullback. So this is going to be a big focus for me as well because this thing is not done. It's just important to note that. I mean, this is a very, very strong weekly bar. So any kind of pullback here I'm looking to add into. Like I said, whether we end up opening up on Monday above 59 and then pulling back and consolidating on 59, I'd be willing to add there. Or if we open underneath 59, I'd be absolutely looking for some kind of pullback right into the EMAs and then a red to a green move on one of the daily bars, right? super, super easy. I think that would be enough momentum to kind of carry us through 59 and then obviously continue towards the gap, which is up here towards 66. We have a lot of room, guys. So, I mean, just from, if we took it from 59 to 66, we still have about a 13% move on this. So important not to take our eyes off of this one, right? ARKK as well looks absolutely insane. It doesn't have any indication of slowing down at all, and this still has room up to its gap at 64.85 to 66, right? So plenty of room for ARKK to continue. This was the same exact thing where we had kind of like our LPS pullback. Wasn't as clean in terms of a flag, but it was just a 1 week pullback. I think on the daily it actually did do that. Let's take a look. Yeah, I mean, daily absolutely had that kind of same look, right? The divergent pullback into the gap and retested the LPS zone. So beautiful chart on ARKK. Remember, I think it's going to go all the way to 64.85, and there's going to be specific stocks, obviously, that lead that. I still think Roblox. I still think Roku, which we'll talk about here in a second. But the clear leader here is Tesla. And as long as Tesla continues, I think all these other names are going to continue running. Tesla's unfortunate, guys. Yeah, I mean, it just never got the pullback. And if you guys were obviously in the Discord, I'll post this on YouTube as well. I actually took it here, right, just in anticipation that it was going to have that breakout. We were up like 40% into the close, and then if you guys, or I think it was 30, I think I'm lying. It was like 30% into the close or something like that. And then obviously the next day, opened and rallied all the way to the highs. I closed into the highs because I wanted to take profits into strength. Not the best idea because it kept going, right? This ended up pushing the 389. I think it's going to open around 400. But I did have a position on this one. But like I said, these charts are definitely harder to get into versus names like, right, Roku was a very easy one, which I'll mention as well. I am looking to enter this one too. We've talked about this one, right? I mean, the daily gap is here at 91, but if we actually take the gap, guys, from like the close, it's all the way up here, right? So 94.5. This has so much more room to go. It's ridiculous. Obviously, this chart isn't as pretty, right? I mean, this is kind of giving pullback vibes once again, right, where we have this long upper wick. It really kind of failed to go through this high here on 12.4, but once again, just kind of letting this pull back and catching up towards the EMAs, which I'll pull up onto the screen here. 1 second, where's load studies? Right, this thing needs to kind of pull back to 78.61 in my opinion. So I would love to see this kind of sell back down, retest 78.61, and maybe into this gap here around 77.68, whatever this red candle's high would be. But this is also pretty good too because we ended up catching the pullback here. I did take a roll position on 12.5 as it kind of pulled back into 78.61, albeit I took it a little bit early, but we ended up catching a nice 30% win as it made its way back through Friday, or not Friday, what day is this, guys? 12.4 is high. I don't know what 12.4 was, but really good win there. But I still think that this ends up pulling back just a tad more. So this has to be on watch, guys. Absolutely has to be on watch because if we can catch that, let's say theoretically we catch the bottom perfectly, right? I mean, this is still roughly a 20% move on Roku. ARKK looks hot. Obviously, the speculative names are kind of leading. This is once again, a 2022 accumulation chart. This, Roku, Hood, Coin, all these names, guys, have all traded to target. And I don't think this one's going to be any different. And I'm going to continue to milk this one until it ends up proving me wrong, right? I mean, this chart has not failed me once. I've traded this multiple times now. So it's just kind of important to keep your eyes on this one and just stay patient. And when you feel like you missed the move, it's okay, right? It usually doesn't end up doing that, right? It usually gives you an opportunity to get in. So yeah, Roku, looking for a pullback still to 78.61 or into the gap. I guess I should mark this. I'm just going to do the high, right? It's 77.7. So some kind of pullback into that, I would look to reload as long as it doesn't trade to 94.50 first. And then, like I said, with Roblox, very similar as well. Either a high tight flag, and this is going to be a little bit harder because the EMAs, let's add the EMAs onto this one as well. I would assume they end up kind of pulling up to like 55.10, which is this old high, or they end up kind of being around here, like just underneath Friday's low, right? I don't know where they would be, but I would be looking for a high tight flag into the EMAs or a break in base of 59, and it just kind of holds here, right? Either way, I'm cool taking that. Contract wise, I'm still looking at like June or maybe like May now, just because contracts are going to be a little bit more expensive. So shorter dated stuff would obviously be a little cheaper. So For this, I would probably be looking at May or June 66 or 67 calls on Roblox. And then as for Roku, pretty simple, right? I think I would actually, instead of taking the 90 calls, which I've been using, I would look for the 94 or 95 calls. Same thing, I'd be looking for June or May, right? Pretty simple here. All pullback names if I can get them, or consolidations at the gaps, I would take these. All right, let's focus on some strength now. This chart is very, very strong. Snow. I used to love trading this stock. Obviously, when it began its downtrend, I kind of took my eyes off of this, but really, really clean gap up here on 1121, which is our peg candle, right? It's kind of forming here on 1121. And it's always important to see how these trade after the peg. Usually, I'll give it 3 days or so. Does it end up selling off and pulling back on diverging volume, or it tests the bottom of the peg candle? Does it sweep into the gap a little bit and reclaim back above? But in this case, it stayed really strong near the highs, obviously consolidated near the highs, and then we got another breakout, a strong breakout, and we're once again consolidating at the highs. But it's also important to look at historical price action, right? If we kind of look to the left, does anybody notice anything important about this general range? Somewhere around here, right? Does anybody notice anything? I would say, for me personally, there's a clear pivot that started here, right? There was a low that was formed. Once again, this was a gap up from earnings back here on 11:30. I think this is 2 years ago or a year ago, whatever. But ended up bouncing, pulled back again, found this level, bounced, pulled back again, and then really created a new high, right? Now, this level is really important in my opinion, because what does it coincide with? We have a gap from up here. Remember, the actual close is right here, but I'm just going to use the wick. And where does the actual gap end up opening, right? Because you got to think this gap down, so it's closed to open. Where did this open at? Right there, right? 180. I don't know what the exact level is. I think it's like let's see. It's on the upper left. 180, 117. So pretty close to where we have at 180.27. If we want to be like sticklers with this, we can go here, right? Right there. Now, what's so interesting about this now? Where are we basing? Super, super crazy spot, right? So 180, 117. If we want to tie it into this as well, let's just mark it just to have it, right? Pretty nice area of support between these two spots, right? So you got to think, if this is going to end up breaking out, where is it likely going to continue to, right? It's more than likely going to start to trade into this gap. And if we can just mark where the last point of it kind of getting into the gap was, it was right around 194, right? So let's just kind of redo this really quickly. I'm going to get rid of that top one because it's so close, right? They open for the gap. This is kind of our chart that we're looking at, right? So support against 180.27, where I'll be looking to enter calls and any pullbacks into that. I'll probably take this off of the open on Monday, if I'm being honest, just to get to some exposure, and I'll add on any pullbacks into 180.27, and that would be my risk. But right, I would be looking for this to continue up to 194.2, since this was the last spot into that gap, right? We'll kind of mark the gap just so you guys can visually see this. I mean, dude, this is pretty much the gap here, right? Like, that's the entire gap. So this was the last point of the highest range or spot reached within that gap. But this looks super, super good, right? We would just want to see this break out and push into 194.2, and then obviously continue to trend up to 226. We have a huge range above us, guys. So, like, once again, I always like to do this. If we can manage to kind of catch the bottom here, I mean, this is about a 25% move towards that high. This reminds me a lot of Crowd. I mean, it's a very similar sector as well. So very, very intriguing chart here. A lot of strength in this chart. Levels are being reclaimed on high volume and are now consolidating on low volume. So very, very clean chart. Once again, if you just want to simplify this, this is pretty much all you need. You need like 180.27, or if you guys want to be specific and use that gap right around, or was it? It's like 180.117, I think, off the top of my head. Yeah, 180.117. That's kind of your area to take calls and kind of risk and just add into this zone. If you guys really wanted to, you can maybe stretch that a little bit further and be able to take calls down into 176, and that would be risk. I actually feel like that would be pretty good. And then looking for this to trade all the way up to 226.56. If you're a day trader, maybe all the way up to the top of the daily gap here at 190. So 190 calls on like a weekly time frame would be okay. You guys know me. I've been kind of going for these higher targets here. And, fuck it. Let's just take this. Let's just actually do what the actual gap would be. So 230, right? 230 calls, 220 calls, 225 calls, all should work. I think I see another swing trade on hand, and that's part of the reason I'm really excited. I love how Snow trades. Once again, I think the stock's going to have a very, very good 2025. And yeah, I mean, accumulative signs, obviously markups on high volume. Like I said, the consolidations on low volume. This thing just looks primed. So looking for 230 calls probably for like June. Obviously going to go further out into 2025 to be able to add in to trend on this one. So if it does break out and it pulls back, I won't freak out. I could add into the higher lows and just let this thing kind of trend out to 230. But beautiful, beautiful chart here. Let's do one thing. I haven't checked the weekly. I assume the weekly looks great, which it does, right? I mean, this is kind of our spot. So yeah, that looks pretty damn good, man. As long as it can turn this little zone right here, you guys can see these wicks here on the weekly, right? And that coincides with that gap. As long as this can turn into support, which our candle closed above, right? And obviously, just a little bit, if it can just pull back and just kind of hold here, right? I mean, this is new, old support becoming support again. And you can expect this thing to start to trend higher through this imbalance candle, right? This is obviously the earnings gap. But yeah, this thing looks freaking really good. Super strong weekly here that kind of pushed us up. Another strong weekly that closed us above that old resistance. So beautiful chart here. Keep this on watch. I'm telling you guys, this will be a big payday. All right, sticking with the theme here of strength. Beautiful chart here from Lulu. If you guys remember a couple months ago, I think back in September, I was bullish on Lulu, right? I was kind of looking for this pullback here into this progression gap. It ended up happening like end of September or beginning of September, I'm sorry. But it was hard because there hasn't been a ton of volume, right? There's been no real footprint candle on this one. So I think it's kind of finally showing its hand here if we can get some kind of pullback. I was struggling a little bit on where to find a pullback level, but I think I got one, right? Clearly, you guys can see upside target still has a ton of room. Whether you want to take it from the wick here on the daily, it's 469, or if you want to take it to the close, right? So if you actually go to the close up here, it's technically 478. So this thing has so much room still to go. But really, you got to think, right? I mean, this is an insane daily bar. The weekly bar, I'm sure, looks insane, which I'll show you as well. But how can we capitalize on some kind of pullback? I just told you guys about snow, right? Where it's really important to give it 2, 3, 4 days to see how it reacts after you get a peg candle in a big, big move like this one. How does it digest it? Does it end up pulling back on diverging volume? Back towards the bottom of the peg candle? Is it a little bit shy into a previous support that used to be historically support, which I'll show you guys here? Does it end up consolidating at the highs and just remain strong, right, where we can get some kind of breakout through? Does it push up to a previous gap, reject it, and become a high type flag? So I don't have enough data to kind of tell you guys exactly what it's going to do, right? The thing is, I have a playbook of multiple scenarios that end up kind of working in my favor that I've back tested over time that I want to see happen, right? So it's important to kind of read what the defense gives us, if you will, over the next couple days, and I think that's the plan of attack. But I do think that there's a really nice pullback potential here, right? So the peg, right at the bottom of the peg is 377. Remember, sometimes it can break all the way down and kind of sweep under this and get back above. I don't think it's going to do that. I would like to see this pull back into this gray zone that I have marked. And why do I like this gray zone? It's pretty simple. This was this old earnings candle low, right? If I kind of zoom in, you guys can, I don't know if I want to zoom in yet, actually. There we go. So you can see right here, earnings candle low. Big buyer stepped in, obviously, off of that low. But it really just kind of consolidated here. It gapped down, and this is also kind of like a progression gap, if you will, right? Kind of a progression gap from here to here between these 2 days on a 4-1 and 4-2. But if we go back even further in time, take a look, right? Very, very important. What do you guys notice about this like zone? A lot of resistance, right? Resistance, so gap down, gapped up, resistance. Sold all the way off to fill this gap. Gapped back up, resistance, right? Multiple weeks and days of resistance. It finally breaks above, doesn't hold this as support, gaps back down, hits it, rejects, gaps above, finally pulls back into this and holds the support, and then it goes on an all-time high rally, right? Big freaking spot here. I'll zoom out on the weekly really quickly as well so you guys can kind of see this. There we go. It's probably the best angle I have of it. Weekly resistance. I guarantee this was a monthly close under, so we'll consider this weekly resistance. And it did kind of sweep out above the top. Weekly resistance for multiple weeks. Remember, it broke out above, failed to hold, kind of undercut a little bit, gapped above, held, and then rallied for an all-time high. Look where we're above now, right? Big weekly volume opportunity to once again kind of pull back and turn this entire little gray zone, right, into support for a continuation higher, right? And that continuation higher leads us pretty close to all-time highs. So beautiful chart here, man. Really beautiful. If we're gonna kind of like get super, super precise with this one, I don't think it's gonna be perfect, right? I mean, I would look to buy dips into this this gray zone, which is technically, I mean, we'll just mark it. We'll just mark it. We'll have to do different colors though. So it's like right around there at 387 to, I would loosen this up a little bit more personally. Let's do this at 380. So let's get the bottom one. Oh shit, 380. There we go. So that's kind of what I'm looking to buy. 387 to 380. It's a 7-point range. And then if it comes down to 377, I would risk a candle close underneath. That's kind of the thesis I'm having right now. So I would like to see this pull back, hold here, recover, maybe kind of give us a higher low, right, for confirmation, and then look to trade all the way up to the top of this gap here, which is 416, and then have a big breakout. It would probably take another earnings cycle, but this thing looks good all the way up to 480. So I'm looking at 480 calls. I haven't really looked at pricing or expiration of what I want to take. I would imagine, I don't know, like June or like September, so like kind of like, you know, further out into next year. 480 calls, maybe even 500 could pay really well. If we time bottom, right, like let's say this is the bottom here. I mean, this is a massive move. That's a 26% move for around $100. This is a beautiful chart. It's important to kind of know strength, capitalize on strength, and kind of see, like I said, let this digest after this big move like this one, and it'll kind of give you the hand in the playbook as to what we want to take, right? So as of now, we need a couple more days of data, but I do like the idea of this pulling back to 387 to 380, risking 377. I might even add in, like if it sweeps underneath 377 and reclaims back above, and then targeting 480. If this ends up staying strong near the highs, you guys should know, right? If it can push up, it'll likely reject this gap here. I'd be okay taking a high tight flag. Obviously, we're further away from like the area we'd want to get ads onto, so you know we're kind of getting our risk to reward is becoming swayed or skewed. But I would take the high tight flag and then look to trade this up into the gap, base the gap, right, and then kind of continue higher. But this chart is so good. Like I said, I think it's a precursor to Nike. Nike, unfortunate, right? I'm glad I took profits when I did. Remember, we were kind of adding at the bottom of this progression gap low. Obviously, each new low was getting soaked, and it kept closing back above, so that's a good sign. We were hoping that it would break above $80 and then, you know, pull back and hold that and then start to rally again. This is an ugly candle, I won't lie, but I think this could be a shakeout, right? I think this could be a shakeout to kind of get people out of Nike, especially after what happened with Lulu and some of the retail names. I would actually like this name for like another lotto if it can kind of hold like the midpoint here. A lot of people I think took their eyes off of this one, but if it can hold the progression gap low, right, which is like right around here, and not trade back towards the bottom, so we can get rid of that bottom spot. I think if it can hold around here, this might be worth another ad, just like lotto size, right? Nothing crazy, like 5 contracts max, to see if we can get a big pop up to 85, because I definitely think this could have a Lulu type move. Like I said, I think Lulu was like a precursor or foreshadowing, you know, kind of the retail space outperforming despite a lot of the negative headlines and overreactions, in my opinion, to the supply chain. This could do very, very well. So I will be keeping my eyes on this one. Don't freak out. I'm not taking my eyes off this one because this is a good chart. This is just one bad daily bar. But if it can hold progress, right, that's why I call them progression gaps. It can hold progress off 78.5 or the bottom of that, like 78.4. I'll take some more size on this one and use some of those profits to see if we can get a big pop to 85 from earnings, which are coming up here on 12/19. So the same week as MU. But yeah, chart looks very good. And then I got one more for you guys. I have a position on this one. This is why I'm doing it last. So we'll talk about this one briefly. So very, very briefly, BA, our entry was on the breakout through this footprint candle here, right? This is that 1029 highest volume, one of the highest volume days ever So we have to kind of use that as our gauge. As a big entity got in, this is probably the best area to risk and kind of get in. So remember, I took this on the breakout through this. We're up a good amount still, but I did say it would come down to what happened at 159.7. This was that clear previous low. We've obviously kind of had some decent bounces off of this one. We tried to hold it through the beginning of September. We failed. We retested, and this is what sent us for a new low. And now we're rejecting this once again. But the most important thing is, if we kind of zoom in again, the rejection has been very, very low volume, so not a big seller there. And all we're looking for is another footprint candle or another high volume candle to step in and form a higher low off of this being our low, right? This is kind of our low. I know the low is technically here, but the footprint here is here. We reclaimed it, obviously, so we're looking for some kind of higher low. And this is one of those times I'll use my EMAs. Right, we're now kind of pulling back potentially on diverging volume into the 9 and the 21. If we can pull back and hold the 921, I might add some more contracts into those the current ones that I hold. Right, I switched into the Januaries, so the Januaries I still think are good. I think that this could get a nice little pop, guys, all the way to 167, right? I really do think that that could happen. I don't know if a news catalyst is coming. It feels like it is. But I think this is a good opportunity to add into this if we can hold the 9 and or 21, kind of form a higher low on the daily in this general range, and give us a footprint candle, right? Something higher volume than what we've been seeing here. If it can give us a good high volume candle right off the 921, I'm going to add into those January contracts, and we're still looking for a pop through 159.7. No profits yet are going to be taken from me until we get to 167. If we hit 167, I'll be out a majority of it, and then looking for continuation into 173, 175-ish. But just a quick little chart here. I just wanted to update everybody on it because it is kind of reaching a pivotal spot here, as you guys can see. I'll get rid of the EMAs because these don't really matter now that I showed you guys them. But yeah, key pivotal spot here. It's pretty well graphed on the weekly as well, just how important this level is, right? The old low, rejection, and we just have to hold this right on some kind of pullback into the EMAs, and then I think this can get a nice pop, reclaim that zone, and then really start to make its way back up to 167, 173. Right? Pretty simple chart here. And that's really it, guys. That's all I have. Nothing else. I mean, I covered MU, I covered SMH, I covered like SPY and the potential short on the indexes for that small pullback that could be some decent money. I covered ARKK names that I still think have a ton of potential, like Roblox, Roku. What else? Also talked about the strength in Snow and Lulu and how those peg candles really formulated very well. Obviously, Lulu needs a little bit more data behind it to see how we're going to take that playbook trade, whether it's a high tight flag off the high or it pulls back on diverging volume and comes down into the bottom of that candle and tests that weekly zone. There's just a lot of potential this week. Very, very, very excited for the next 2 weeks or so. I thought pretty much all the setups were dried out. But we got a reinvigoration from some of these names. So I'm very excited. Hopefully you guys share the enthusiasm. We're coming into a big week here with CPI and PMI, and then we come into another big earnings cycle, specifically centered around MU. It's a big position for me, obviously. And then we're gonna go right into Christmas, and then through Christmas. I mean, oh boy, we have a lot coming, guys. We have a lot coming. We have FOMC coming in the next 2 weeks as well, the same week, I believe, as MU earnings. So just a lot coming, right? And that's exciting because, I told you guys MU and semis are cyclical. And if we continue to see QE and a lot of those, restrictions around China-based names, right, in terms of semis and easing of purchasing, right? I think we'll see some crazy stuff happen. So that's going to be it, guys. It shouldn't be too long of a scan. I didn't really rant too much. I try to keep it super quick. But I'm going to go ahead and get this uploaded. Hopefully you guys get this within the next 15 minutes or so.